So I'm Jessie Heagren, founder of Careers After Babies. I am also a mother of 4 children under 10. They were all, oh no, 3 of them, sorry, were in our bed last night, got to bed at midnight, woke up at 5 o'clock this morning, 3 of them breathing on my neck, coughing in my ears. So my bags are even bigger than usual today. I'm going to start by giving you a bit of background to me, and then I'm going to tell you a story of what a typical maternity leave looks like. Then I'm going to talk you through some of the research that we've done and talk about parenting more broadly. And then we'll start to talk about what organisations can do to retain their working parents and basically be employers. So just quickly, quick bit of background. My last employed role, I was director of strategy and distribution in that large well-known insurance company called Direct Line Group. I was one of the youngest senior leaders. So I think we were about 15,000 people, and I was one of the top 200 leaders by the time I was 30. So I'd had a real steep career trajectory, lots invested in me. I was the only female member of our board. I was on the succession plan to be the next CEO. And then I can't even remember how it happened. I was asked to go and present our business strategy to the main public-facing board. And whilst I was in there, excuse me, one of the non-exec directors asked me what it was like to be a young, talented female working in their organisation. I had one of those moments of, I can either tell the truth here, or I can just go with the party line. And I opted to tell the truth. And I said to this guy, the reality is that I have no friends at work. Nobody really kind of looks or sounds like me. And I'm surrounded by middle-aged white men with stay-at-home wives all day. I would also like a baby at some point in the next couple of years. And when I look around this organisation, I think that that will just spell the end of my career. They were obviously horrified and lots of paper shuffling, etc. ensued. And one of the things that came off the back of that conversation was that they asked me to set up their diversity and inclusion committee. So this was pre-babies, this was about 13 years ago or so. And I led the gender and working families part of that work for the remainder of my time that I was employed. Fast forward a couple of years, had my first daughter. I only took a 5-month mat leave because I didn't want somebody to cover my role and end up taking it. But when the time came to come back to work, I wasn't ready, I guess, wasn't in a great place. It had been quite a physically tough birth. I wasn't adapting very well to the complete loss of control of everything in my life. And when I went back, I lost all my confidence at work. So I stopped speaking in meetings. I didn't want to be there. I just couldn't get through the day. So I lasted about 8 months. And then I said to my husband, we were going to have a second baby anyway. Let's just do it now. And then in my head, I was thinking I can just take a year off and I just don't need to think about any of this stuff anymore. So I did that. And during that second mat leave, I just couldn't face going back. So I quit completely. So I became effectively one of the stats that I'm going to talk to you about today. Before we get into those stats, I'm going to tell you a story. This is part fiction, part fact. So it's a story collated from all of the stories that I hear from women every single day about their experience in maternity leave. So I'm going to introduce you to our 3 characters. So we have Lucy, who is the main character in our story. We have her manager, Steve, and we have her junior, Luke. So Lucy's a bit of a star in our business. She's been with us a few years. She's going places. She's doing well. She'd be pretty expensive to replace. She reports into Steve, who has 2 kids of his own, a bit more grown up. His wife did most of the childcare. But on the whole, he thinks Lucy's absolutely great. And then we've got Luke, who's only been with us a couple of years and is training under Lucy. Lucy is pregnant for the 3rd time. She's had 2 miscarriages before, which she hasn't shared with work. But this 3rd one is going well, and the time has come for her to share her news with Steve. So they go into a meeting room and she says, Steve, I'm pregnant. He's like, oh, that's great. Although I'm losing another woman to babies. How annoying. Give HR a call and find out what we need to do next. So she's a bit miffed, but she's like, that's okay. It went as well as it could have done. Gets on the phone to HR and finds that she's allowed to take time off for her appointments, and they give her a couple of other pointers as well. The pregnancy progresses well, and they agree that she's going to hand over all of her work to Luke. And that handover goes fairly well, and all of a sudden the time's come for her to go off on her maternity leave. They agree before she goes off that they will check in after about 5 months. And before she knows it, she's had the baby, she is deeply entrenched in things, and the time has come to have that conversation with work. They've arranged a video call. She's washed her hair for the first time in about 3 weeks, and the baby pukes in it right before they get on the video call. Steve is there, asks her how it's all going, asks her how she's feeling, asks about coming back to work. She panics and says, yep, I'm definitely coming back in a month's time, like we talked about. And then after the call thinks, oh, I don't know if I want to do that, actually. So she emails them and says, can we leave it an extra couple of months? That's all agreed. That's absolutely fine. She works through the rest of her maternity leave, and then they have a follow-up call ahead of her coming back where she's surprised to find that Luke is on the call with Steve. They have a bit of a conversation about coming back. No explanations given. He's just there, kind of part of the conversation, and they agree that she'll start a month after that, and that she'll do 2 days from home and 2 days in the office, and that she won't work 5 days. All fine. She goes back to work. On her first day, she's surprised to be met by Luke in the foyer at the office. Slightly confused, but okay. She goes up to the office, says hello to the rest of the team, and finds out that Steve has been sent on to common, and Luke is the acting team leader for her area, which again, she's slightly miffed about because that was her sort of next step up. That was on her PDP. That's what they'd always prepared for. But again, she takes it. After half a day, she gets the call. So nursery ring and say, really sorry, your baby's just been sick. You need to come and pick him up. So she has to leave work, go back all the way back home and pick up the baby. Over the next few weeks, that keeps on happening, as we know. Luke's quite understanding to start off with, but after a while, he starts to get a bit annoyed. So a couple of months in, she's trying to get to grips to things. There's a new system nobody showed her how to use. There's a new patter that they use with clients that nobody's really told her about. So she's feeling a little bit uneasy, not really sure how things are going. And then she has a conversation with a lady in the canteen who's also recently returned, who tells her that she's had access to coaching and phase back and lots of other tools that Lucy didn't know about. So again, she's a bit miffed that she hasn't had access to all these things. 6 months in, she finds that the baby's constantly ill. She feels like she's underperforming. She is pretty much coping alone. Her husband's a doctor. He's not around very much. And Steve's vacancy becomes a permanent one. She doesn't get told about that. She finds out via someone else. And when she speaks to Luke about it, he says, well, I thought you were, otherwise engaged or kind of preoccupied with other things going on at the minute. She goes home to her husband and tells him what's happened and reflects on the last 2 years and what a difference things have made in her career. He tells her that he has received a promotion at work, and they have a conversation about whether it's worth her even carrying on in her career. And they make the decision that she is going to quit. So she becomes another stat. Now, I said that story is fictional. It's not fiction. So that's very, very typical of all of the experiences that a woman goes through when they go off on mat leave. What you'll hopefully have heard in there is lots of little things that happen that chip away at her engagement. So it's not one big thing that they get wrong. It's lots of little tiny things that just make you think, oh, is this really worth it? Can I do this with these conflicting priorities that I've got? Obviously, something similar happened to me. After I left my, I always call it my big job, which sounds really stupid, doesn't it? My employed job. I realised how often I was meeting women who the same thing had happened to. So they'd had these really great careers, and then we'd be sat in baby groups and things, and I'd be sat next to the ex-marketing director of this place or the ex-FD of this place. And I was just like, why are there so many of us sat here instead of actually being out doing the things that we've worked for years to be able to do? So I set up a platform to help mums find flexible and part-time work. And then I realised how much I was just sort of chipping at the edge of the problem. So actually you can what happens with lots of working parents is organisations say they're one thing on the outside, but then actually when they get into an organisation, they find that things are very different, and that's quite often determined by their line manager and their attitude to things. So I started working with more organisations on basically what good looks like and how to fix some of those things. And then I did a big piece of research called the Careers After Babies, The Uncomfortable Truth. And I'm going to share some of the findings from that report with you quickly now. So the first major finding was that 98% of mums want to go back to work after having families. I just want to say at this point, actually, the research was very much focused on mums, but I will kind of go on to talk about working parents more broadly. So yeah, 98% of mums wanted to carry on working. 74% of families in the UK need two working parents to survive. So I think this, for me, this is something that goes beyond just kind of wants and desires, but very much goes into what people need in order to support their families. There was a slight bias, I guess, in that my audience is more sort of professional mums, but I think, again, that 74% number kind of demonstrates how much higher it is than we're often told that women actually do want to go back. I guess this was the big shocker, the one that made the headlines. 85% of women leave the full-time workforce within 3 years, and 20%, almost 20% leave altogether. Now, that 85%, so it's worth pointing out, so the 15% that do try and go back, another 60% of those end up kind of leaving that full-time workforce as well. So there are very few working mums that are actually able to make a full-time office-based job work alongside having a family. And there are lots of reasons for that, which we will come on to shortly. One of the most common reasons actually that women cite for leaving, so there's that chunk that leaves straight after they have children, and then the ones that fall out afterwards. So the two most common reasons are they're made redundant, which you wouldn't believe how often I hear of redundancy programs for one. And the other reason is mental health. So they're physically unable to cope with the demands of parenting and a full-time job and holding that all together. Where women return to a different role, 79% left the business within 2 years. So one of the things that lots of organisations do is say, you've asked for a work pattern or a flexible working arrangement that we can't accommodate in this team, but look, there's this team over here, they've got a vacancy, we'll move you over to there, which I always get asked at this point whether that's legal. I think most of you will probably know this, but if you return within 6 months, you can go back to the same job. If you return within 12 months, then you can go back to a similar job, so long as all your pay and benefits, etc., are protected. So where organisations do this and put people back into a different role, that loss of engagement from those two transitions is just too much and they end up leaving. So as a retention tool, that absolutely does not work. There were 32% fewer women in management roles and 44% more in entry and admin levels. If you're looking for the stats as to why the gender pay gap is as big as it is, this, for me, is the one. So what this basically tells you is that women have worked their way up to a leadership or a management position. They have children, work are unable to accommodate them safely, and they will go back into some form of work, but probably at a more junior level. So what happens is this. So whilst we might have, and I know these numbers differ by industry, but let's just say broadly that our intake is even. The intake generally tends to be 50-50. Some places will have actually a higher bias with women because they recognise that they're trying to do more to bring more women into industries. It might be different in events. I don't know if the bias is slightly the other way. It probably is. What then happens as they move up to the next level? So I worked with a company not long ago who, on the surface, they looked at their maternity retention figures and they were like, we're doing a great job. Everyone that's going off on mat leave is coming back and they're staying with us. But why do we still not have women at this next level to promote up? What they found was that lots of the women were looking around the organisation before they even had children and saying, this is just not a place where you would have kids. So they had a big dropout between ages sort of 27 and 32, where women were just looking and saying, I'm not doing this here. And they were jumping ship at that point. So it was kind of masking that loss now. So we see, so that sort of initial dropout point is that perceived lack of support. So that's people looking around saying, actually, no, this isn't my place. When you get up to that next level, it tends to be fallout from an actual lack of support. So that situation that I've just described where somebody isn't supported in their transition back into work, there's another big fallout point then. And then by the time you get up to these senior levels, that talent just isn't available to promote into that board level because there's just not enough people there. So this is typically what we find with the organisations we talk to, which obviously is reflected in here. Oh, these stats have just made me sad every time I read them. So it's taking upwards of 10 years for women's careers to recover, and 3 out of 4 are earning less than they did before they had children. So if you want to be really, really miserable about it, you may as well say, do you know what, women, just don't bother working for those first 10 years because you're kind of going to be back where you started. That's a very pessimistic take on things, but that was what the research found in the women that we spoke to. The earning less, again, if we're kind of being critical of it, then obviously lots drop down to part-time arrangements, but there's still that you should be able to kind of recoup that through promotions and that type of thing, those loss of earnings. So not good. We also asked women what their preferences would be. So actually, if you were given complete free rein, what would you choose? Most of them said 3 or 4 days a week. Now, I look at most jobs and think that could probably be done in 4 days a week if we really pushed ourselves. There are obviously other ways around things. I think the want doesn't feel beyond the wit of man to deliver, and we'll come on to kind of talking about how more ways of meeting what they need later. Why does it matter? Because 83% of women will be mothers by the age of 45, and that number's similar for men. So again, one of the challenges you quite often hear is, oh, you're just talking about a small population here. We're not talking about a small population. If we're talking about parents more broadly, we're talking about most people. And even then, if we're just talking about women, it's still half of the population, or just under half the population that we're looking at. So it does matter. Matters for dads too. So I work with a guy called Hanson Lee from Daddy Life. I don't know if any of you have come across him. They did a report. This one's a little bit older now, but it's still, I suspect the stats are even more kind of compelling than they were at the time when this research was released. 68% of fathers have a partner that works full time, and the majority of millennial fathers have a different role to those of previous years. Again, I think so. There's a real swathe of evidence that demonstrates, particularly in men under 40, that the desire that they have to play an active role in their children's lives, sorry, not their parents' lives, in their children's lives, is very different to what we've seen in the past. It's much more, you'll observe this anyway, but the want to be there for pickups and drop-offs and just be much more active. I always tell the story at this point. So my husband, when we first had children, I had obviously quite a big job, and he was working for a much smaller company. And I went into the bathroom, the stick gave me the positive lines, and I went back into the room where he was sat and said, "It's positive." And he was just like, "Oh, that's amazing." And I was like, "This is our baby. It's not just mine. This is our baby. Everything's going to be even." And I think he's obviously been very good with that and very supportive. He's had to get all 4 of them to school this morning. But the point is that I think expectations are very different, and what partners are willing to do in heterosexual relationships is very different. And we'll come on to talk about this a bit more in a minute. 100 companies so far in the UK have equalised shared parental leave. That number's growing daily, so that is increasingly common. If you're not quite sure what I'm talking about, that's where we're giving partners and dads the same the same benefits as we're giving for maternity. So if you're offering 3 months fully paid, 6 months fully paid, you're offering that option to dads as well. So times are changing, which is good. I like to share this slide as this is why we're doing it. So if you just have a quick, benefits all sound quite straightforward, but actually there's a real kind of tangible benefit. If you just manage to save one working parent, then the financial savings are absolutely massive. And I think Historically, this number's perhaps only applied to women, but increasingly, if we look back at the stats here, did I put the one about? So there's another stat actually that goes alongside these. Oh, here we go. 39% of dads leaving due to lack of flexibility. So I think there's a really compelling business case that says if we're not servicing working parents as a whole, then we are going to lose them. And there are companies out there that are doing it. So these are some of the organisations that Careers After Babies are working with. So each of these has reached out to me and said, we want to be better for our working parents, kind of come in and assess what we're doing, tell us how we're doing, and then work with us to get better. So there's obviously some big names up there, which is exciting. So on to the more positive part. It's not all doom and gloom, I promise. The reality is that being a good employer of working parents is complex and it's nuanced. So there's no, as I alluded to earlier with that story, there's no one big thing that fixes all of this. So I quite often people say to me all the time, "Oh, if we're just going to pick one or two things to do, what should we do?" And the reality is it's lots of little things. Off the back of the research, we did lots and lots of analysis. I interviewed lots of companies. I worked with lots of different experts, and we together developed the Careers After Babies framework. And that fundamentally is based around these three principles: policy, process, and practice, and these 7 themes that we identified. And I think we've got time now. I'm going to walk through each of these. Feel free at any point to jump in with any examples from the story or your own examples of things where you've seen that happening, and good or bad examples. I'll take you through some of these now. So I mentioned the stats around flexibility. So the single biggest thing that working parents need, any parents in the room will know, is flexibility. So I need to know that I can drop off to childcare or school or whatever it may be. I need to know that when, and I say when because it's not an if, when my baby's sick all over me randomly at 3 o'clock in the morning, it always seems to be that time, that I am not then going to be under intense stress trying to explain to my manager why I'm not there. And I always say to people, there are two ways you can manage a working parent. So there is the one that says, I know all of this stuff is going to happen, and I'm going to kind of give you the freedom to just be with that and do what you need to do because I value you as an employee. Or there's the one that says, I know all that stuff's happening, but I'm going to completely ignore it and I'm going to make your life hell while we're doing it by making things really stressful for you. And I think those are the two choices that we tend to be left with. So flexibility is our absolute number one. If we can offer 3-day work patterns, 4-day work patterns, absolutely fantastic. If we can make sure any core hours are during school hours, even better. I was working with an organisation yesterday who were like, yeah, we're great. We've got core hours. They're from 10 till 4:30. I was like, okay, that's cool. You know, most wraparound care school ends at 3:30. Most wraparound care ends at 4:30. It's not ideal. You can't physically get there on time. So if you are thinking about doing things with core hours, again, bearing in mind the massive percentage of your work population this impacts, then perhaps have a think about the timings of it. Flexible work requests are, I can never remember the exact number off the top of my head. Again, flexible work requests come with 2 different schools of thought. So you get the organisations who are very difficult about things and will say, oh, I don't know if it's going to work, or I don't know how we can do this. Then you get the organisations who say, if that's what you need, then I'm going to try and make this work for you. And if it doesn't work, then we'll have an open conversation. What we're looking for with flexible working is what I always call a can we make this work attitude. So you start from the point of saying, how can we make this work? What can we do? What adjustments can we make? And then you go from there. Now, I'm a business person. I've run huge P&Ls. I've had hundreds of people working for me. I get it. I'm not saying this is ignore everything at the cost of the business, but it's a different mindset to start from how can we make this work rather than this isn't going to work. I can't possibly see it. And I think those attitudinal differences make a massive difference. Another fantastic thing that I've seen work actually is for new parents saying you can work from home for the first year, no questions asked. So we know that when kids start nursery, that they are sick for approximately 6 to 8 weeks. It happens constantly. Just say work from home. Be there to pick them up, to do whatever you need to do. If mothers are breastfeeding when they come back, again, saying you can work from home, it takes, again, all of the stress out of things. They're just nearby. They might still want to come into the office and that might happen. But again, you taking that sort of layer of pressure off to say you can be there if you want to just makes a massive, massive difference. This is where everybody starts. So everybody says to me, oh, right, we need to crack on with the policies. That's true to some degree. So yes, do I believe policies have to be in place? Absolutely. They are a real statement around an organisation's intent on how to handle something. However, they are not the be all and end all. Policies, again, as many of you will know, are good in that you have, I kind of think of them as a backstop. So you've got something there that on paper that says, right, this is what we're doing. Actually, what people care about is how you handle things. So I've taken these, and this is a bit hot off the press, so it won't sound as well rehearsed as perhaps some of the other stuff does. We have just worked with a company on the accreditation who they don't have the strongest policies actually. So in terms of the benefits that their policies offer, they're not best in class by any stretch. But their scores, if you look at this, I feel supported by my line manager when I came to work up at 90% versus what people think about policies. So do line managers know all the contents of the policies? Do they understand all the contents? Do they know all of the processes? No, they don't. But people still feel supported and they've scored really, really highly in terms of their experience and everything across the board. So again, kind of looking for evidence that policies aren't everything. This is it. Actually, what makes the difference on how positive people feel about their organisation, how likely they are to stay in their organisation is about not necessarily what's written on paper and what benefits are there, but actually it's about how supported do I feel? Is my confidence being built back up? Do I feel like this organisation still wants me to be employed here? So there's a lot more to it. That said, I know I was going to make another point actually on the policies side. A lot of it comes down to how policies are applied. So I did a talk at a big German company, and the lady there had spent 2 years working on a project to rewrite all of their policies. So she'd gone out, written all the business cases, got all the benefits side off. Right towards the end, I still can't believe this happened. As she was coming right towards the end of that project, she said to them, she found out she was pregnant. She told work. She missed the cutoff for the policies that she'd just redeveloped by 48 hours. And they said, no, you can't have access to them. Little things like that, the ill will behind it. Again, I accept that things have to be done fairly, and they have to be done in a certain way. Things like that leave such ill feeling, and it's another one of those chips that I mentioned earlier. It's another thing that just chips away at that engagement. How am I going to feel about this organisation that I've just done this massive piece of work, literally focusing on that? I've bought you the business cases, I've told you how bad it is, and then you turn around and say, oh, sorry, missed the deadline. You don't quite make it. The way things are done and how things are applied are absolutely critical to that maintaining engagement piece. If you take one thing away from what I'm saying today, please let it be this one. This is the thing that makes the biggest difference to how working parents feel generally about their return to work. So we've called it empathetic and inclusive line management. What we are talking about here is line managers are the single point of failure. I haven't got a vendetta against line managers. I get that they're very busy people. They've got lots of things to do. However, it's the line manager that makes or breaks the experience that somebody has in an organisation. And the saying, I can't remember what the saying is, that people don't leave jobs, they leave other people. Something like that, isn't it? It's true. It's really, really true. It's about that interaction. It's about how that person feels. This is particularly true for working parents who have been through an enormous transition They, excuse my language, don't know their arse from their elbow. They've just come back. Everything's absolutely chaotic. They are generally feeling very vulnerable and insecure. I'm generalizing here, but as we'll see later on, I think that applies to about 90% of people that have been on extended periods of family leave. What they need is empathy and to feel valued and to feel like they are wanted back in the organisation. So I think lots of us do a very good job of not necessarily making people feel wanted. So they become part of the rush in conversation that we're having kind of is just another thing to deal with. Actually taking a little bit of time with someone who's feeling in a vulnerable position, and this applies across the board, not just a parent that's been on leave, but taking that little bit of time to actually make them feel wanted. Little ways that this can be done. Keeping in touch has a massive impact here. So I was going through the survey results for an organisation last night, and there was one comment in there that really stood out to me that said, we had a conversation about keeping in touch. I said that I wanted to be kept informed of everything. I received one email about a Christmas party 48 hours before it was due to happen, and I couldn't arrange childcare in time. It's just a bit shit, isn't it? You know, when you think we can do better than that, it's really not that difficult to add a personal email address maybe to a distribution list temporarily. Just little things like this that actually can make a big difference to somebody who's out on leave. One of the things that you will have heard through the Lucy story, and something that I think jumps out for me a lot when I'm speaking to people, is line managers not necessarily taking ownership of the process. So that very deliberately the conversation that happened between Lucy and Steve and him saying give HR a call, it doesn't feel great. Yes, you might call HR anyway, but at that point, what you need is for your line manager to say, okay, cool, great news. I'm really excited about this for you. You know in the back of your mind that you've got shed loads of stuff that you're going to have to do off the back of it. But what that person needs from you is a positive reaction, ownership. We're going to get you through this. We're going to get you off. We're going to get you back, and it's all going to be okay. Because again, you're coming at it from a place of vulnerability and not really knowing what's going on. Another thing actually that I mentioned in the story was I've mentioned that this is lots of little things, which is why it sounds like I'm jumping from one thing to another, but I'm doing it intentionally to make the point of how many. This isn't a one silver bullet situation. It is lots of little things that need to be thought about. You'll note in the story when they were doing one of their keep in touch conversations, it was by video call. I'm a mum, I've just had a baby, maybe I've washed my hair and put makeup on for the first time in a while, and then the baby's just puked all over me. Do I want to be sat on a video call opposite someone who's suited and booted in an office in London? Probably not. Little things like that, does it have to be a call? Could a telephone call not have done, where I wouldn't have had to worry about any of those things? Again, it's something little, but just something to think about. The reaction when she said she was pregnant, I've touched on it just now. But coming at it from a place of, oh God, I've got loads to do. Oh, I've lost someone else. Instead of, that's great news, well done. He didn't know about her miscarriages, so wouldn't have known that it was perhaps some of the past that was attached to it. But that's something else in itself. So again, of the results that we're seeing coming back on the baby loss side, so on the baby loss side, what we're seeing is we know that 50% of women who have had a child will generally have experienced a miscarriage. If you look around your office and think of working parents, how many of those women therefore are likely to have? Did you know about that? Did you know that had happened? The fact that we feel unable to share that information is probably quite indicative of kind of the culture or the relationship that you have. The same is true of dads. I've spoken very publicly about, we had a couple of miscarriages. My husband took them a lot harder than I did. So it was something that I knew about. My mum had them, so I'd had real life experience. For my husband, it was like a baby died and he had to go and have lots of therapy and everything off the back of it. It's something that we don't even talk about. We don't even consider. We're sort of starting to talk about miscarriage, baby loss and that type of thing, but very much from, mums might need a couple of days off. Again, it's all around this empathy. What's going on in people's lives at home is what they're bringing into the office with them. So they're not things that we can just ignore. Which of the following did you experience on your return to work? that big blue chunk there is loss of confidence. And that second chunk is anxiety. And that third chunk is I felt like a different person. So in terms of demonstrating to you how people are feeling when they come back in, this applies to dads coming back off shared parental, co-parents and mums. These are the emotions. This is the place that they're coming to you from. So when we're having those conversations about whether they're planning to return or whether it's in those first few months after somebody's come back, again, just kind of keeping this context in mind makes a big difference. Consistent nurture and support. So this is our next theme. I've touched on a lot of these already, actually, jumping around. New fears and vulnerability, I think we've talked about. In terms of the support that we offer, so I think we're quite good at maybe at the tangible benefits. So if I'm an organisation and I look at this, I might say, right, I can put some confidence coaching in, and I can maybe put some sort of mentoring arrangement. Those things help. But actually, I think thinking more broadly about how do we, for anyone that's been on any extended period of work, how do we bring them back into the organisation and get them back up to speed again? So what is your re-onboarding process? Are they going back through an induction? Are they being retrained on things? The introduction of during COVID, when everybody suddenly switched from kind of doing meetings in rooms to imagine you're a parent that went off at the beginning and then you came back afterwards and you missed that whole transition in between and no one ever showed you how to use Teams or anything. That can feel absolutely massive. If you're going into work every day and everyone's whizzing around something that you've been using constantly for the last year, but you haven't, you don't want to be, if you're senior as well, you don't want to be asking somebody that, or how do I log onto a video call, kind of how do I access the chat, where do I share my files? It's little things like that miss but can make your day-to-day life really quite intense and make you feel wobbly. Thinking about things like that have happened over the period of time that they've been off makes, again, a massive difference. It's something little, it's not particularly difficult to do. Also thinking about training. So I always remember that when I went off on my maternity, my 5-month maternity leave, I came back and everybody else on the board had done this course on storytelling. So all of a sudden, everybody went from being very wooden, like insurance presenters, to suddenly standing up and telling these wonderful stories, like delivering on all this stuff. And I was like, what's happened to you? You were the most boring man on earth before I went off. Like, what's happened? But again, I completely missed out on that. And that was just not available. It was just something they had done for a period of time. And being somebody who has never been a particularly confident presenter, that would have been absolutely massive for me. I would have loved it. But again, thinking about things like that is massively important. Consistent nurture and support. I think we talked about it. Oh, thinking about how different people access things. So massive promoter of employee resource groups, business resource groups, networks, whatever you like to call them. This obviously being a fantastic example. One of the reasons that I advocate for them so much is because I always like to think of, if you imagine your culture being like a safety blanket. So if somebody within your organisation is acting in a way that contradicts that. So maybe there's somebody in the team who always talks about part-time workers being, leaving early, or, oh God, you're always out with the kids and that type of thing. If you have the type of culture that doesn't accept that, somebody will feel very confident calling them out on things like that. If you have the type of culture where people are quite comfortable to stand up at the end of the day and say, right, I need to get back for school pickup, great. It's all about how the organisation feels as a place, and I'll come on to it with the last theme more in a minute. Sorry, lost my way again. But diversity networks and groups are really great for signposting resources and being there again as an additional source of places that people can go. So perhaps my line manager doesn't quite get it, and they're not going to get it anytime soon. Where else can I go in the organisation that's going to help me understand what benefits are available to parents or other groups even? They can be really fantastic for that. At PwC, they recognise that lots of their dads don't like talking in an open forum, so they found that their networks are really effective for women and their working mum community in particular. But they had quite a low uptake from dads, and they'd quite often come to one or two sessions and not come back again. So they implemented a dad's fireside coffee chat. So what they found that worked really well was if they partnered up with one dad in a different part of the business, and they would meet up sort of once every 6 to 8 weeks and just have a chat about what it was like to be a new dad. That for them worked really, really well. Again, I know I'm generalizing, but I think just thinking about the different ways of accessing people and what people feel comfortable doing, I think is really important. Parenting as valued. So I've just touched on this. This one is thinking about the organisation as a whole, kind of what language we're using, how we're talking about things, how people are feeling. I always think parenting is the biggest leveler of all. So if somebody is a parent, it's very easy, whether I'm having a conversation with somebody on the street, whether I'm having the conversation with, I was about to say Elon Musk, I don't think that would work with it, but somebody very senior, someone very powerful. If you've got children, you've got something to engage with them about. And we don't use that enough. So particularly, I think, as leaders within organisations, this is a way of tapping into an area with people. It kind of gives you something to chat about. There's always what's the test of, whether you know the people in your team, how many kids they've got and what their names and ages are and that type of thing. There's a reason for that, because you're connecting with them on a real personal level. And these days, what we crave from people is that authenticity. So I want to know who you are, and I want to know what you're about. And again, this is a great way of doing it. I was parenting loudly. So again, I've touched on this a little bit. The power of this should not be underestimated. So does anyone know the Aviva story about shared parental leave? Anyone heard this? So they had a big demand from their parenting network to equalise their shared parental leave, and they worked on it for ages. They finally announced it and said, yeah, right, we've done it. Here you go. Everyone's got that thing that they asked for. And for the first 6 months, they only had a 5% uptake, and they were absolutely baffled. They were like, what is going on? Everybody said there was this great big thing they wanted. No one's taking it. Then one of their senior leaders, his wife became pregnant, and he said, right, I'm taking 5 months off. So I'm going to take 5 months shared parental leave. Absolutely unheard of. They made a really big noise about it, a really big song and dance. Their uptake went from 5% to 96%, and it's consistent 96% since. What that demonstrates is the power of somebody, a senior person, particularly kind of role modeling that this is okay to do. And I think actually it's worth mentioning on the shared parental piece, what you find is that, again, it comes down to line manager. So I was speaking to a guy not long ago, very well-known organisation, I won't name them, make a really big deal about the fact they've equalised shared parental leave. He said to his boss he was taking it, and his boss made a very derogatory remark about, what kind of man he was, questioned sort of masculinity. Why are you doing that? Why is your wife not looking after the baby? As much as we like to think everybody's great and people don't do that, we know that there is and there always will be pockets of people that sit within our organisation. And again, this is why I come back to this cultural safety blanket. If your culture is genuinely working parent friendly, that type of behaviour doesn't go unnoticed and unaddressed. It gets picked up and it gets challenged and people get told. Last one, parents are progressing. So what we typically find, again, particularly after maternity leave, but we are starting to find it after shared parental leave as well, is that there are two things that happen when someone comes back from work. So there is, I've mentioned the sort of loss of confidence that lots of women in particular feel. They come back to work, and then their boss will make assumptions about what they're doing. And again, I mentioned it in the Lucy story. So you get this clash of, I don't think that I'm the same person that I was before, with, or actually you're quite busy with the other thing that you're doing. And that person suddenly drops off the radar. And that it quite often stays that way for quite a long period of time. So I will speak to people all the time who've been promoted every 2 years, had a really fantastic career. All of a sudden, they haven't done anything for 6 years. Some people are okay with that. Some people are like, but this is, young child time. I'm all right with that. But for lots of people, that's not the case. And promotions come up, opportunities come up that get missed that previously would have been theirs. I'm just going to tell you the story very quickly because I'm conscious of time. There was a lady who I spoke to last year on GlaxoSmithKline, and she's working on a team to develop a new migraine medication, which is meant to be absolutely game changing. So she worked her way up. She was assistant team leader on this medication, found out she was pregnant, went off on a 9-month mat leave, came back. In her first week back, her boss said to her, I'm moving on. I'm going to work somewhere different. And that was the job that she had always wanted. And she just looked at him and was like, oh, why now? It's my first week back at work. And he said to her, it doesn't matter. This is your job. This is the job that you are going to have. This is the job that you were always working towards. I know you might not be quite feeling it right now, but I've got you. I'm going to help you through the interview process. We're going to honour your flexible working arrangements, and we're going to make sure you go for that job. She still took some convincing, but she went for it and she got it. And that's the job that she now does. And I saw her not long ago, and she turned around and she was just like, I can't believe it. I've got a young child, but I've also got the job of my dreams. Didn't think it was possible, but it is. That story for me kind of indicates just the power of somebody kind of having the right backing and not making assumptions and not saying, oh, you've got kids, so you probably don't want to do anything. That can also change. So yes, maybe in the first 3 months, you might well be in that place, but 3 months later, once you've, I say nailed it, does anyone ever feel like they've nailed it? Once you feel like you're a little bit more in control of things, those views may change and you may feel quite different about things. We've covered most of the other things. We've talked about the trajectory. And just very quickly before I stop, because I'm conscious I've mentioned careers after babies a few times. So what we actually do is we go in and we assess organisations against all of those themes that I've talked about. There are 75 proof points. So just to demonstrate that, I mentioned how nuanced and complex it is. There are 75 different things that we think organisations could be doing. We assess where they are against that, and then we work with them over a given period of time to make them better. And I've mentioned some of the brands that we're working with. But yeah, please do connect with me. And if you've got any questions, let me know.